I'm joined at this moment live on this broadcast by heavyweight minister in the Modi government, Piyush Goyal, now joining us on this broadcast. Minister Goyal, welcome. I want to start by understanding from you your estimates of the actual new jobs you think are likely to be created as a result of the entire gamut of schemes and announcements that you've come up with for employment-linked incentives, internship incentives, all of them taken together as an aggregate. Does the government have an estimate of how many incremental additional jobs this might create?
Well, many of these schemes have been very artfully crafted so that they are focused on new employment. They are not available to those who are just replacing one employee with another and for an existing task. And also you must recognize that you have to look at the job scenario very holistically. This is one budget which has addressed several issues. On the one hand, it has brought out the schemes, the 5 schemes which will aggregate, provide new jobs for 4.1 crore people. But apart from that, you must also see the thrust that is given to infrastructure, thrust given to manufacturing, thrust given to exports, the thrust given to an organized development of tourist places. So I think on the aggregate, this is an employment-oriented budget. In many cases, they will benefit from these 5 schemes, but there could be many employees or workers, maybe in the gig industry, maybe in the services sector, who may go beyond these incentives and get opportunities because of the massive investments that would flow in out of the various budgetary announcements.
With you, I want to focus in particular on exports and imports. I want to just walk across to the India Today Budget Intelligence Dashboard, show the figures to our viewers, and then get the minister's outlook on exports. So I'll start with exports to begin with. I'm looking at total exports, where we're seeing goods exports actually come down, but service exports go up. But the total export figure, which went up from 676 billion in financial year 22 to 776 billion in financial year 23, then at about 778 billion. So flatlining over the last 2 years, which of course has to do with a lot of global uncertainty as well. But a lot of those factors still continue. There are rising trade tensions. If President Trump gets elected in November, then America could increase its tariffs even further. In this global context, your outlook, Minister Goyal, for the India export story?
First of all, let me correct you. Where did you get the flattening for 2 years? The exports were at about 494. Yeah, 494 went up to 676, then went up to 776. Only last year they were flat, and at the beginning of the year, I had announced that this year we expect exports to be flat, because after 2 years and a scorching increase of 50% plus in 2 years, you can't continue to sustain that level of growth. So last year, in the beginning of April 23 itself, I had predicted and I had told my industry that this will be a year of consolidation. If we can end the year flat, we would have achieved good results, particularly considering 2 wars, the aftermath of the COVID crisis and of late the Houthi crisis. And I think I was very worried that we may not even end up flat, but we were fortunate to have overcome the last year's number, grown from there, though albeit by a small amount. This year, the first quarter, we've shown healthy growth, both in goods and in services. And I would believe that we will end this year with a significant growth by the end of the year, well on track to achieve our $2 trillion target by 2030.
So let's spend a moment on merchandise exports. Here we have on our screen the goods export numbers, which went up in financial year 22 to 422 billion from a low base of 291.8 billion in financial year 21, and then stayed at 451 billion in 23, 437 billion in financial year 24. So coming down a little bit, and this is one of the key concerns in terms of merchandise exports. Now, how do you see this challenge being dealt with in your outlook, specifically when it comes to manufacturing in India and manufacturing in India for the world? Minister Goyal.
राहुल, आपका चैनल तो बड़ा रिसर्च ओरिएंटेड है, आप इतने बड़े-बड़े डैशबोर्ड्स बनाते हो. I would have expected a little better from you. When you look at the 437
from the Ministry of Commerce and Industry,
you fail to
there.
tell your
Yes.
audience. अरे तो सुनो तो सही दोस्त.
अच्छा ठीक है.
I'm also looking at whatever number I heard you say, but I didn't hear you say that a large part of export business was lost because to protect consumers' interests in India, we had stopped the export of iron and steel products for some time, iron ore and all of those products, so that consumer prices in India can be maintained. We continue to tax export of rice. We have stopped the export of wheat. We had stopped for a very long period of time the export of onion. Now it has been brought back, it's opened up. I think it's important to recognize that in the balance between export income and consumers' interests in India, several initiatives have been taken by a proactive Modi government to ensure Indian consumers' interests, and some of the export losses, I'm told aggregating 15-20 billion, have been lost in the current year. Going forward, I'm very confident of crossing the 451 achievement of a year before last and exceeding that in the current year, even though we continue to have a number of restrictions on export in place even as we speak.
I want to come now to imports, and we'll spend a moment on imports. I look at total imports to begin with. Total imports were at 511 billion in financial year 21, went up to 896 billion in financial year 23, and then 853 billion in financial year 24. We heard Minister Goyal from the Chief Economic Advisor yesterday that given that the trade imbalance with China is continuing to increase, why don't we now bring foreign direct investment from China into India, let them invest, create jobs here, do manufacturing here, and that will create employment locally. However, we've also heard from the External Affairs Minister, the Raksha Mantri, that till the time status quo is restored on the line of actual control, the PLA goes back, there is no question of them business is normal. Now we've got the Chief Economic Advisor saying, let investment from China come into India. That's the economically logical thing to do. And then you've got the national security imperative, which says it can't be business as usual till the time we have friction along the border. How do you deal with these two completely contradictory impulses?
First of all, let me inform your viewers that a growing import is also a sign of growing demand in India. The fact that we don't have enough capacities in India to meet consumer demand, which in a way opens up the possibility to support manufacturing even further and look for greater number of jobs in manufacturing. Because when the world and Indian investors see that imports are going up, they start identifying the products being imported and they start looking at creating manufacturing or domestic capacities. So in a way, imports going up is a twin sign. One, a sign that demand is robust, economy is doing well, consumers have greater amount of income and are spending in the economy. And B, time for investors to start coming in with domestic business and domestic manufacturing. So to that extent, imports having gone up is leading to greater capital formation and investments both in the public and the private sector. Of course, infrastructure investments have also been a big area of focus over the last few years, including the current year budget, and that is also increasing the demand for goods and services very significantly. Secondly, the Chief Economic Advisor's comments are kind of giving us suggestions or ideas. They are not expected to look at the entire geopolitical situation. The government of the day has to balance all different viewpoints and then take a very considered decision in national interest. So I would look at the CA's suggestions only as an advice or as an idea, but I would go with what the government finally will decide as the nation's policy.
But are we seeing some thawing of economic ties with China? Because in some press notes, for example, there have been some amendments made, not by making much noise, but for example, allowing some Chinese nationals to come in, allowing for visas to be given for businesses that they were doing and Indian companies wanted that. So are we seeing some tinkering over there, that the complete wall that had been created post-Kalwan, is that thawing a bit in your view?
No, first of all, we never stopped the visas for technicians who are coming in to install or train Indian workers on equipment that has been procured from China. There are many equipments where China has a competitive edge. There are many equipments that have already been procured or imported or were in the pipeline, which has come into the country. And we are a very practical government which has allowed such technical manpower to come in for installation or skilling of Indian workers in those equipment. There's never a change in policy. The policy continues as it did in the past.
One of the things the economic survey talks about is don't bring restrictions to export for farmers when there is an opportunity for them to make money. They're saying take food out of how you're looking at inflation for interest rates being set. Now, that's something that's happened because there, again, from a minister like your perspective, you've got to protect, A, the interest of farmers, and you've got to protect the interest of consumers. If food inflation goes up, it becomes a big problem for the government because middle class people who buy those foods come out and say, "Arey, mehenga ho gaya, Goyal ji, kya kar rahe ho?" But then we've seen also onion farmers, for example, in places like Maharashtra saying, when there was an opportunity for us to make money, you came down hard and took that opportunity away from us. So how do you look at what the economic survey is saying? Take food out for the purposes of determining how interest rates are set. If there is an opportunity for farmers to make money, let them make money. But then you may have citizens, voters say food prices are becoming even costlier. So how will you resolve this? And what do you think of it?
First of all, you've conflated two completely unrelated issues. What the chief economic advisor has said, and I fully concur with him, that when we are doing interest rate setting, we need not at all consider food inflation. What we really need to look at is core inflation. Because food or fuel are items which are agnostic, the demand is agnostic to interest rates. Even if we make the interest rate twice what they are, people are going to eat food. People are going to consume energy, either for home or for the automobiles. So energy need and food need is completely agnostic, irrespective of interest rates. Trying to control the inflation on these two heads through interest rate is a misplaced notion, and I support the chief economic advisor's suggestion, and I do hope policymakers will look at this very, very seriously. It will give a great impetus to India's growth story, and it will actually help us increase the incomes of our people so that even if there was food or energy inflation, they would be in a position to handle it. That's as far as the interest rate setting is concerned. The second element that you talked about is whether farmers suffer when we are bringing in any of these decisions to support consumers and keep the food inflation down. This government, the Modi government, has been very wise in their management of the balance between farmers' interests and consumers' interests. In the past, when Sharad Pawarji was the agriculture minister in the Congress-led UPA government, they did the similar measures. So I can list out a number of instances where Mr. Pawar and UPA brought controls or restricted the export of onions or rice or various products, where they brought a minimum export price, where they brought an export duty on onions. They've done that in their government also. But in their government, they left the farmers to the mercy of the market. And when they brought in such export curbs, the farmers suffered. Prime Minister Narendra Modi, himself coming from a very humble background, common man coming in from the villages of Gujarat, a poor family, recognizes that we have to protect the consumer interests while at the same time ensuring farmers don't suffer. So when we brought in certain restrictions on onion, what did Mr. Modi do? He immediately put NAFED and NCCF in the market in Nashik, in Lasangaon, in Madhya Pradesh, Gujarat, Karnataka, all the markets, to buy from the farmers their produce at reasonably good, attractive prices. So even when the markets could have tanked to 5 and 10 rupees, NCCF NAFED would procure at 20 and 23 rupees, recently at 25 rupees, so that farmers did not suffer. I think the people who suffered could have been the traders. And what you hear as the noises coming from certain markets, it's the traders' voices who tried to corner the material from the farmers at low prices and then tried to make a huge profit from export. I think they are the ones who made those noises. For the farmers, the Modi government always ensured that NCCF and or NAFED, any of these government bodies would be there standing to support our farmers if they wanted to sell any material.
Okay, last question before I wrap up. You're working on different free trade agreements. There's a new government in the UK. Which ones at this moment are you most confident of being able to seal, sign and deliver to the Indian people?
Well, as you are aware, I've never put a deadline to negotiations of a free trade agreement. We have the free trade agreement along with the bilateral investment treaty, both to be finalized simultaneously, and they are both under negotiation with the UK government. Now that the government is changed, I met my counterpart, the trade minister, at the G7 only last week. He has reiterated that they are very, very committed to finalizing the free trade agreement and the bilateral investment treaty with India. Simultaneously, I met my counterpart trade commissioner from the EU. They are also equally committed and desire to conclude the free trade agreement quite quickly. We have other free trade agreements under negotiation with several other countries. All of them are simultaneously under negotiation, but we never ever put a deadline or a compulsion on our negotiators. Their job is to get the best deal for India, and until a fair, equitable and balanced agreement is negotiated, India will not compromise the interests of our country. We will continue to persevere and negotiate, and when we find that the agreement is good for India, is balanced between the two countries, a win-win for both countries or set of countries, we are not in a hurry to finalize, yet we are working relentlessly and pursuing it. The air is pregnant with possibilities. Whoever comes up with a good deal, they will finalize first.
A poetic note to end a number heavy day. The air is pregnant with possibilities, says Minister Piyush Goyal. Thank you very much for joining us on this broadcast.